Welcome back. We now proceed into segment 5, Seeing Invisible Fields. I'd like to have you recall what Diane Vaughan said in her book about Challenger. It is unfortunate that these forces are invisible and unacknowledged. So how can we make something which is invisible and unacknowledged seen? What do you think? Well, let's play here. This is similar to what we looked at before. Would you modify your behaviors unconsciously and automatically, just like you do for gravity in each of these contexts? Giving and receiving a marriage proposal, your fiance's family dinner, at your bachelorette party, or if you're hijacked on your honeymoon. And if you didn't modify your behaviors, would you likely be sanctioned? If you misbehaved at the fiance's family dinner, at least in the U.S., you'd get a kick under the table. If you misbehaved on your honeymoon being hijacked, you'd likely get killed. On your bachelor party, someone would say drink more and so forth. So what we see here is the social context, invisible fields drive behaviors. So let's take an analogy here with a common effect you're all familiar with, a magnetic field. Imagine I put a red bar on the table in front of you and said, can you tell me with your hands if it's magnetized? The answer is probably not. But if I said, let's go back to the 3rd grade where you put a piece of paper on top of this and put iron filings, tap the paper, could you see the magnetic field? Sure. So what you've done here is you've used the iron particles as a tracer particle to see the field. And probably there's people clever enough you could write a program and analyze that and estimate the dipole moment of that field. And so there's our clue. How would we measure the invisible social fields of groups of people? We'd measure their behavioral norms, and for individuals, their behaviors. And as you'll see, we're going to carefully pick 8 behaviors to measure to see the social context field. Now, after I put together the mission that repaired Hubble, I was promoted up to the top of NASA. I didn't like it much. I didn't like politics. I don't like the kind of work you do. Didn't like working with the Congress. Didn't like working with the White House. And I had more time to myself up in that job than I had running the astrophysics division with all its complexity of interfaces and projects. So I decided to study leadership, and I got an appointment as a professor in the business school at the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I live to this day. So I began to ponder, what could I use to understand better how to see these invisible forces? So I'm reflecting on this, and I'm asking myself, what is it that a physicist, because I spent many years studying physics, what is a physicist could bring to a problem like this the business school professors couldn't? And this voice spoke to me, and it said, the right coordinate system turns an impossible problem to 2 really hard ones. Okay, so now I'm trying to think about what kind of coordinate system would work. So I took a summer and I took the 5, 6, 4 things that all business books say great leaders have to do, and I put them on the wall of my office, and I began to play with coordinate systems to see if I could find some kind of a pattern that would make sense out of this. You know, as a scientist, I want logical patterns. I just don't want groups of unassociated things to remember. I had no success at all. I'm getting tired of the effort. I'm getting about ready to give up when I opened the door one morning and the newspaper has a Dilbert cartoon. The Dilbert cartoon says, every consultant makes his living with a 2x2 matrix. Aha, I made this too hard. It must be an XY system. At the time I was reading Carl Jung's work on psychological types. This is German, but I read it in English, of course. And he gave me the answer. He gave me the fundamentals of how our personalities are built. He said we all build our personalities first on the information we prefer to use. It's either intuited, which is an unconscious integration of past experience. For example, firemen who go into a building, or Gary Klein tells about firemen who go into a building and they just know something's the matter and things don't feel right, so they run out, and it turns out the fire was in the basement. They got out right before the whole thing exploded. And then our senses, what we see with our ears, eyes, nose, and so forth. Then he said we all then build our personality on a second element of how we innately prefer to decide. But do we prefer to use emotions, or do we prefer to use logic? Now, I know the technical people in the audience may be thinking, some of you at least right now, I can't believe anybody would make an important decision using emotions. So one time I'm in a class with engineers in a workshop, and someone asked me that exact question. How could anybody make an important decision using emotions? And I said, well, how'd you pick your spouse? With a questionnaire? He said, matter of fact, I did. Well, interestingly enough, it turns out the population splits about 50-50. This matter is more complicated than that, using emotions or logic. So now I went back to see if I could use this coordinate system as a tool for analysis. Analysis means to simplify in physics. And so I looked at his theory, and he said that people who prefer emotional deciding and intuitive information naturally value other people. Wow, I said that's really interesting, because that's a very, very core human need. I colored it green and named it cultivating, because when we appreciate other people, we're building them. You might think of the fertilization of appreciation to do this. And so that was interesting. I went to the second one and said, oh, this is really more fascinating. Including is what people most naturally do in relating, and we all need to feel we belong. By the way, I picked the yellow because I ran out of primary colors, but if you want a way to think about it, you could imagine the monarch butterfly being attracted to a yellow flower in that image. These are very, very potent needs. Next, I went to that next dimension. It's about blue sky thinking, so I named it blue. It's about a vision. Don't we all need hopeful futures to look forward to? I think we absolutely do. And then, then I looked at the directing dimension, the orange, and don't we all need to know what others hold us accountable for? Don't we all need the ability to succeed? Now, the logical color for this would be red, but in Western countries, red's not a good color. Think of a stoplight. It is in China and much of Asia, and in the Soviet and in Russia. So I picked orange because it's more neutral, and you could think of the way our orange sun organizes our solar system. Here's the takeaway here. These are 4 core human needs that transcend every nationality, every race, every country. This is why we have 4D dashboards doing assessments in more than 75 countries and working everywhere, and I'll give you some examples of this. They're in London at Lloyd's Bank. They're in France at Electricité de France, the world's largest nuclear-powered electric utility. Mines in Malaysia, and million-person state-owned enterprises in China. This is the versatility of our work because the 4 basic processes are immutable. So people often ask me about Maslow's needs hierarchy, and I think there's a lot to this, so I'll show you kind of how it works. What he believes is that their needs are in levels, and you must meet the lower level needs before you can meet the next ones. And so the base are physiological needs: air, water, sleep, food, and warmth. The next is an emotional need, which is feeling safe, to feel secure. Next need is to feel valued, to feel appreciated. The next need is to feel you belong, to feel included. And I tried to make these needs kind of proportional to the length of the base of these little diagrams. The next is the logical need number 1, need for a realistic and hopeful future to get us out of bed every day and go to work one more time. Next is the logical need number 2, to be able to meet people's expectations for what they're holding us accountable for, and as well as what we're holding ourselves accountable for. When these needs are all met, you've got a platform for self-actualization, which is realizing one's potential in work and life. This is how it works. If the lower needs aren't met, everything collapses. This is why the 4D system requires you to deal with to address all 4 needs as people need you to do so. That wraps up number 5. Next session is Unpleasant Realities. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you soon.